Today, we're looking into something really fundamental, these hidden forces that kind of nudge our decisions one way or another.
Yeah, we're drawing inspiration from, well, a classic, The Psychology of Persuasion, to try and figure out why we say yes so often, sometimes without really, thinking it through.
Exactly. Think about those times you've agreed to something and maybe later you're like, hang on, why did I actually do that?
Right. And more often than not, it isn't some brilliant logical argument that won you over. It's usually these more subtle psychological things humming away in the background.
So our goal today is really to bring these influences out into the open, make you more aware so you can navigate things a bit more, well, intentionally.
Definitely. And this isn't just like abstract theory floating around.
No, not at all. Understanding this stuff gives you a real edge, whether you're, say, negotiating something, making a purchase, or even just trying to figure out your own reactions sometimes.
Okay, so let's dive in. First up is this concept the book calls automaticity.
Automaticity.
Yeah, it's fascinating how our brains create these shortcuts. It's a bit like animals, with their trigger responses. Like that mother turkey, her instinct kicks in just from hearing that specific cheep, cheep sound from a chick. It's automatic, efficient mostly.
And we do this too, but maybe in slightly more complex ways.
Oh, absolutely. There's this amazing Xerox machine study they talk about, people trying to cut in line.
Ah, yes.
Their success rate shot way up if they just use the word because. Even if the reason after because was totally pointless, like because I have to make copies.
Right. It went from, 60% success without a good reason to 93% just by adding because I have to make copies.
Exactly. Just that one little word because seemed to like flip a switch.
It makes you wonder why. Why is that word so potent?
Well, it points to how much we rely on these mental shortcuts, right? We're
Yeah.
just bombarded with information, requests, decisions all day long. We can't possibly analyze every single one deeply.
So we develop these rules of thumb, like because usually signals someone has a valid reason. So,
Yeah,
okay, let them go ahead.
precisely. And these shortcuts, I mean, they're usually helpful. They save mental energy, but they can definitely be, well, exploitive.
Like that jewelry store example, that one's wild.
Oh, yeah. Tourists didn't know much about turquoise jewelry. The owner mistakenly doubles the prices, thinking she wrote two.
And then suddenly it all sells out because their mental shortcut, that expensive equals good rule, kicked in. The high price itself became the trigger for perceived quality.
Especially when you don't have other information to go on. Price becomes this easy indicator.
So a key takeaway there is maybe be a little cautious about assuming higher price means higher quality, especially if you're not really familiar with what you're buying.
Definitely. Be aware of those automatic triggers. They serve a purpose, but knowing they exist is the first step to not letting them be used against you.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's shift gears to another really big one, reciprocation.
Ah, yes. Reciprocation. This feels so fundamental, doesn't it? It's that incredibly strong social rule you repay favors, gifts, invitations.
It's almost like a reflex. Someone does something nice for you, you feel this need to do something nice back.
It's the glue for so much social cooperation, but yeah, it can absolutely be leveraged.
The book mentions that professor, right? Sending Christmas cards to total strangers.
And getting a surprising number of cards back from people he'd never met. They just felt obligated to reciprocate the gesture, even though it came out of the blue.
It doesn't have to be a big thing either, does it?
Not at all. Small favors, even ones you didn't ask for, can create a really strong sense of obligation. Like that study with Joe selling raffle tickets.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that one.
So Joe would either just ask people to buy raffle tickets, or first he'd do them a small, unsolicited favor, like bringing them a Coke. The people who got the Coke bought almost twice as many raffle tickets. They felt they owed him something, even for that small, unexpected kindness.
Wow. And it's kind of unsettling how it works, even if you don't particularly like the person asking.
Exactly. Think about the Hare Krishna Society back in the day. They used to give people a flower or maybe a book before asking for a donation.
Right, I remember that. You'd try to give it back, but they'd insist.
And their donation rates apparently went way up. People felt obliged because they had accepted this gift, even if they were initially trying to avoid the interaction. The rule is just that powerful.
It overrides liking sometimes.
It often does. And then there's the idea of uninvited debts. This one's interesting.
Uninvited debts.
Yeah, like the Disabled American Veterans mailing. They started including little personalized address labels in their donation request letters. People hadn't asked for them.
But they got them anyway.
Right. And that simple act, sending this unsolicited small gift, nearly doubled their donation response rate. People felt a slight obligation because they'd received something.
That's subtle. Quite effective, it sounds like.
Very. Which leads us neatly into a specific and sometimes manipulative technique built on reciprocity. Rejection, then retreat.
Okay. Also known as the door-in-the-face technique.
That's the one. It's quite clever, really. You start by making a large request, one you fully expect will be rejected.
Something unreasonable.
Exactly. Then, after the person says no, you retreat to a smaller request, the one you actually wanted them to agree to all along.
So the second request seems like a concession, like you're meeting them halfway.
Precisely. And because you made a concession, by retreating from the big request, they feel pressured by the reciprocity rule to make a concession too by agreeing to the smaller request.
The classic example is the Boy Scout, right? He asks you to buy like a $5 circus ticket. You say no. Then he asks, okay, well, how about buying one of these $1 candy bars then?
And you're suddenly much more likely to buy that candy bar than if he'd just asked you for the dollar up front, because he gave way first.
It feels like you're compromising.
And here's, well, maybe the wow moment related to this. The book brings up the Watergate scandal.
Watergate. How does that connect?
Well, Jeb Magruder, who was involved, testified later. Apparently, G. Gordon Liddy initially proposed this outrageous $1 million plan involving kidnapping, sabotage, the works. Obviously, it was rejected.
Okay.
Then, Liddy came back with a scaled-down $250,000 plan that focused just on breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Magruder felt that after rejecting the first insane plan, they shouldn't just dismiss Liddy completely. The $250,000 plan, while still illegal and crazy, seemed like a concession in comparison.
So the rejection then retreat might have made the actual Watergate break-in plan seem more palatable.
The book strongly suggests it played a role. It seemed like a compromise after the initial outlandish proposal. It's a chilling thought, really, how this psychological tactic could potentially influence decisions with such massive consequences.
Wow. That really does put it in perspective. It's not just about buying candy bars.
Not at all. And part of why it works so well is that the person being persuaded feels like they've kind of dictated the final terms. They pushed back on the bigger request, got you to offer something smaller. They feel more responsible for and satisfied with the final agreement.
So they're more likely to stick to it.
Exactly.
Okay, so if someone's using this on you, this rejection then retreat, how do you defend against it without being, a jerk to someone making a genuine concession?
The key is redefinition. You need to recognize the tactic for what it is. If you realize that initial big request wasn't genuine, that it was just a setup.
Then the concession isn't really a concession.
Right. It's just part of the manipulation. The book says, basically the rule is you repay favors with favors. But if the initial favor or concession was actually a trick, a compliance tactic, you're under no obligation to reciprocate.
So identify it as a tactic, not a genuine gesture.
Exactly. Call it out in your own mind. That frees you from the feeling of obligation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's move on to the third big principle. Commitment and consistency. This one feels very internal.
It really is. It taps into this incredibly strong desire we all have to be, and perhaps more importantly, to appear consistent with what we've already done or said.
Once we take a stand or make a choice, we feel this pressure both from inside ourselves and from others to behave consistently with that commitment.
Yeah, think about that story of Sarah and Tim. She chooses Tim over another guy. He promises to change his ways, marry her, stop drinking.
But he doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But instead of leaving, Sarah actually becomes more devoted, more convinced Tim is the right one for her. Why? Because she had already made that public commitment, that choice. To admit she was wrong would be inconsistent. So her mind starts building new justifications for staying.
It's like her actions dictated her beliefs, almost.
In a way, yes. And it's not just romance. Look at the Transcendental Meditation Seminar example. People invest time, money, then they encounter logical arguments against TM's effectiveness. Often, instead of questioning their decision, they become even more fervent believers. They seek, as the book puts it, the comforts of mindless consistency, because admitting they might have wasted their time and money is too psychologically uncomfortable.
That leads into another example that really made me go, huh, the toy manufacturers.
Oh, the Christmas toy strategy. That one's quite something.
Explain that one. It's clever.
So manufacturers heavily advertise a specific popular toy leading up to Christmas. Parents promise this toy to their kids.
Setting up that commitment.
Exactly. But then the manufacturers deliberately undersupply that toy to the stores just before Christmas. Parents can't find it anywhere.
So they have to buy substitute gifts instead.
Right. But the initial promise to the child is still hanging there. Then, come January or February, guess what starts appearing in ads again?
The original popular toy they couldn't find.
Hmm. And the kids, remembering the promise, start saying, "You promised, you promised." And the parents, driven by the need to be consistent with their earlier commitment, often end up buying the toy then, driving a whole second wave of sales long after Christmas.
That leverages the parents' desire to be consistent with their promise.
Wow. It really does. And it highlights that the act of commitment, taking that initial stand or making that promise, is the crucial first step. It locks you in psychologically.
The Korean War POW example is a much darker illustration of this, isn't it?
It is. The Chinese communists used what they called a lenient policy, but it was incredibly psychologically astute. They didn't rely on harsh punishment as much as getting prisoners to make small, seemingly insignificant commitments.
Like writing essays that were maybe only mildly critical of their own country or slightly pro-communist.
Exactly. Small things, maybe things the prisoner didn't even fully agree with, but wrote down to get slightly better treatment or just to get it over with. But once they'd written it down...
They'd taken a step. They'd committed something to paper.
Right. And the captors could then use that. "See, you wrote this. You're a collaborator." And to remain consistent with that action, however small, prisoners sometimes found themselves gradually shifting their attitudes or complying with larger requests later on. It built momentum.
That shows the power of even small initial commitments.
Absolutely. And it also points to why written commitments are often more powerful than verbal ones. There's a permanence to it. Making it public adds even more pressure.
Like people in weight loss clinics writing down their goals and sharing them, or someone announcing loudly they're quitting smoking.
Exactly. It makes it harder to back down later because your public image, your consistency is on the line.
And what about effort? Does
Yeah.
putting more effort into something make the commitment stronger?
Definitely. Think about harsh initiation rites, like Fraternity Hell Week. It seems counterintuitive. Why would enduring hardship make you more loyal? Because you have to justify that effort to yourself. I wouldn't have gone through all that suffering unless this group was really important and valuable to me. The effort increases the perceived value and strengthens the commitment.
But there's a key condition for these commitments to really take hold internally, isn't there?
Yes, a crucial one. We need to feel like we made the commitment freely, without strong outside pressure. That's where the study with the kids and the robot toy comes in.
Remind me of that one.
So, kids were told not to play with a really desirable robot toy. Group 1 got a mild warning. It's wrong to play with it. Group 2 got a severe threat. If you play with it, I'll be very angry and have to do something.
Okay.
Later, when the researcher left the room, the kids who got the severe threat often played with the toy as soon as they could. The threat worked only when the authority figure was present, but the kids who got the mild warning, most of them still avoided the toy, even with no one watching.
Why the difference?
Because the mild warning wasn't enough external justification to force them not to play with it. So they had to internalize the reason. I guess I don't want to play with it because it's wrong. They took personal responsibility for the choice. The severe threat just made them comply outwardly.
That perceived freedom of choice is key for internal commitment.
Absolutely. Which brings us, unfortunately, to the lowball tactic.
The car salesman special.
Often, yes. Here's how it works. They offer you a really great price on a car, maybe several $100s below competitors. You get excited.
You commit mentally. This is the car. This is the deal.
Right. You start filling out forms, maybe arrange financing. You imagine driving it. You're building all these internal justifications for why this is the right decision. Then, right before you sign.
Oops, an error in the calculation. Or the manager won't approve that price. Or a feature you thought was included actually costs extra.
Exactly. The initial advantage, the thing that got you to commit, is suddenly removed. The price goes up.
And yet, people often still buy the car at the higher price.
It's bizarre, isn't it? But because they've already made that psychological commitment, invested time, built up all those supporting reasons in their head, I like the color, it handled well on the test drive, my spouse likes it. The removal of the initial low price often isn't enough to make them walk away. They're already hooked by their own consistency.
So, resisting this kind of stuff, the pressure to be consistent even when it's maybe not in your best interest. How do you do that?
The book suggests listening to your body, essentially. Pay attention to those stomach feelings, that gut reaction that tells you you're feeling trapped or pressured into something you don't really want, just to appear consistent.
Trust your gut.
Trust your gut. And, similar to reciprocation, consciously identifying the tactic can rob it of its power. If you recognize, this feels like a low ball, or they're trying to corner me using my earlier statement, just naming it can help you step back and reevaluate based on the current merits of the situation, not just past commitments.
That's really useful. Okay, so wrapping this section up, we've seen how these automatic shortcuts, the powerful pull of giving back, and our deep drive to stay consistent can all be major influences, often working below our conscious radar.
Definitely. And hopefully listening to this, you've maybe had a few moments where you thought, oh yeah, I've seen that happen, or maybe that's why I did that thing.
Those aha moments are what we're aiming for. So here's a practical takeaway for everyone listening. For the next day or so, just try to be a bit more observant. Notice the interactions you have, the requests you get, the decisions you make.
And maybe think back to a recent time you said yes to something, what was going on. Can you spot any of these principles? Automaticity, reciprocation, commitment, consistency may be playing a role, however subtly.
It's just about building that awareness.
Exactly. Which leads to maybe one final thought to ponder. Now that you're more aware of these powerful psychological forces, how might you approach your choices, your agreements, your interactions differently? How can you ensure your yeses truly align with what you want and value?